Hi everyone, thanks for popping in and seeing what I'm up to. My name is Nikki B, and you can just call me Nikki. No, I am so glad you guys are here with me. We're going to continue with our book. We're on chapter 25, and I think there's 36 chapters altogether, but of course they're very short. So on with it, she says. And if no one's told you today, I love you and I'm proud of you and we can get through anything together.
Chapter 25, Erasing the Borders of Borderline Personality Disorder. A lot of boundaries have been drawn to this personality disorder to see if it is a personality disorder. Many claim that the traits associated with this condition are conditioned by external stimuli and therefore a personality disorder. Yet other people would use the same claim not because the characteristics are already embedded within the person and affected by external influence. Borderline applies to the state that there is no personally subject or issue either here or there. The individual places this responsibility on those with whom they are associated instead. These people lack independence, which is why they try to achieve it via others. Another factor is that a person with a borderline personality disorder, BPD, is also typically willful when it comes to violence. This means that a person with BPD uses violence if others first participate in it or show signs that it is somehow helped by other people. Nevertheless, typically not even an aggressive or violent person, this is what borderline means and applies to. Inner aspects of borderline disorder. A person with BPD depends solely on peer control. In addition, those with this particular condition are more likely to exert peer pressure and are easily manipulated by peer power. I will provide some reasons as to why I think it is motivated by a person's need to feed acceptance. For one thing, all they do is based entirely on this fact. That's why they tend to look like sociopathy, psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, and manic depression. This will rapidly turn into something considered to be the acceptable norm. Even if such actions explicitly contradict personal convictions, moral standards, and the law, this will hold true. To put it bluntly, they commit any action, take up any idea, or connect emotionally with current trends. For example, if you see something on TV or in a movie that strikes you as something to gain popularity, you'll try it, even if it's dangerous to him or her or others. These external influences can come from almost any origin: people, films, television shows, video games, etc. Therefore, only the person has accountability and blame, and not the source, as some people would argue. I personally believe that we all gravitate naturally towards a friendship with others, but anyone with BPD has a much stronger pull into that connection and perverts it into an impulsive need. Thus, it subconsciously rationalizes that their livelihood depends on it. Essentially, someone with BPD is a narcissist inverted. Rather than everything around you, a person with BPD revolves around your self-importance. The energy emitted by such associations is thus leached. The attitude and readiness to accept anything that is considered to be the majority or more strong, even if they know they're unreasonable, detrimental, and or dangerous rationally. Signs of BPD. A gap appearance. The person that a BPD person needs to be admitted is the great void they try to fill in themselves. As they trust and fill this vacuum, their mental and emotional energy continually is consumed, leaving little for yourself. That is why they have recourse to the business, approval, and cooperation of others. We define this as an emptiness feeling or perception. Note this symbol is the key reason for everything else. Strong relationship variance. As previously stated, they are often willing to adopt any other philosophy, strategy, and coercion, whatever the strange, unreasonable, or serious existence of such stuff. Therefore, somebody with BPD will bounce from one person, community, or concept to another, even if it contains a complete contrast or dramatic distinction. impulsive. As stated clearly, this idea of person is going to jump at any opportunity to fill this void with the methods listed. This can be expressed in all fields of your life. Some of them are harmless or irritating rather than anything else. But they have some dangerous impulses. These include financial mischief, careless sexual encounters, high-volume food consumption and intake, and even vehicle and pedestrian navigation. Lost sense of self. Because they willingly adapt to others impulsively, certain thoughts and emotional gestures, they lose sight of who they are. The consequence is identity loss. Such a feeling, experienced in the size of what they do, is like knowing that you will die and that you are unsure about what will happen afterward. The way they interpret the product of their own devices is such fear. Nevertheless, they feel powerless and cannot repair it. Emotional instability. Because others tell them how they should think, feel, and act, they lose confidence in any emotion generated by themselves. This becomes a frightening thing. Much like how people freak when they just keep their own thoughts in silence to keep them entertained. Usually, they react in many different ways when you feel this way. Most of them are very close to what you would expect from someone who is scared, upset, frustrated, and angry. These can become drastically episodic, nervous, anxious, and violent. The length of these episodes ranges from seconds, minutes, and hours to rare days, which is why manic depression or post-traumatic stress disorder are often a matter of confusion. Intense wrath. Usually, when you get emotionally confused, you always respond by being angry. However, in most ways, someone with the level of anger of BPD is magnified. 1. It's justified, so it doesn't have the need to regulate it. 2. It can be confused because it has to show emotions and ideas which are special to it, so it's acceptable rage. Or 3. It can just have trouble controlling the anger in general. Typically conveyed by daily or repetitive shows, they seem to be constantly angry or often disturbed by alterations. Anxiety. Someone with BPD has an anxiety dependent on approval by others. We are mainly afraid that they will be expelled, exiled, and or feel alone. Paranoia comes with the self-generated illusion that every corner is waiting. So they are constantly concerned about what others think of them. This state of life is continually under pressure and taxing. That is why they feel the need to put on other people's power so that they can survive. Symptoms of abandonment. BPD individuals will often take great steps to avoid being discarded. Such abandonment is sometimes actual, engineered, and self-manifest, that their very existence is based on agreed feelings. Imagine how they would feel if they had been lost or hated. These are some of those who claim to have abusive relationships or to have adverse circumstances. Even if they have other, healthier relationships, they can still be faithful to the unhealthy to some extent. Suicidal. If lost or feeling abandoned, most BPD patients will use suicide to exploit. Generally, this is an empty threat or intentional failure, a final effort, used to make those who left them reconcile and coddle their needs. This sometimes takes the form of self-mutilation and self-torture, but then those collapse into their produced vacuum so deep that they believe that there is no other way out than in death. Chapter 26. Are you living with someone with borderline personality disorder and trying to find answers? When you live with someone with a borderline diagnosis, it means that you have probably found this chapter since you have been looking for answers to the problems and difficulties in your relationship. There are a few things you need to know about this mental disorder before you get into the answers. We help you to properly apply the tips provided in the second part of this section. Borderline personality is known for its traditional fear of abandonment. That anxiety stems from invalidating and abusive relationships with children or teenagers. In the first years of life, we humans depend on our parents' or caregivers' support, love, and affection. Therefore, when we invalidate and threaten, children tend to interpret this as signs of rejection or punishment. Therefore, the child tends to believe that the explanation for these parental attitudes is also if such negative actions continue to come from the family. In addition to this, core self-deprecating attitudes will arise in the unconscious, which will gradually become aspects of one's personality if changes do not occur. Therefore, in conjunction with other common core behaviors, signs, and behavior unique to borderline personality disorders may occur. This fear of surrender can manifest not just as pure terror, but also as phobia or even horror. Then the non-partner will face a constant demand for attention, affection, empathy, and reassurance with someone with a borderline personality disorder. The action of parents that leads to the child's fear of abandonment usually comes suddenly, causing the child to believe that abandonment might probably occur at any time, although things seem okay just now. You also want to offer affirmation and devotion to your loved one, and also note that you will feel the same even though you cannot display it for various reasons, such as work and other everyday obligations. This way, you will send a signal that your beloved can be sure of your feelings, regardless of whether or not you are able to show them in the circumstances. This way of manifesting your feelings helps your loved one restore his internal equilibrium while dealing with a person with borderline personality disorder, and also brings a positive impetus to his relationship. Individuals with a borderline personality are also noted for their sudden emotional changes, apparent calmness, and manipulation. Some might see them as acts of egoism or narcissism, but they are simply desperate attempts to reclaim recognition, love, and understanding. In this case, what you want to do is to stay calm and collected, to reaffirm your feelings and condemn the negative actions of the person who you care for with a calm and clear voice, rather than to give in. You will not only reassure your beloved person with this technique that, given the actions of his or her, your feelings have not changed, but also give a negative opinion on the unwanted behavior without being perceived as accusing. Don't worry, if it doesn't work at first, just stick to it. This approach directly addresses the borderline patient's basic desires, and results will come soon afterwards. Chapter 27. Living and Loving Someone with Borderline Personality Disorder. We are a mentally advanced business. Emotional problems are now openly shared, not just by celebrities, but by the average person. It is not unusual for people to tell friends that they have an anxiety, anger management, depression, paranoia, phobia, eating disorder, drug abuse, OCD, or ADD. Nevertheless, there is a common psychological condition about which many people know little or nothing. Why? Because their symptoms are largely interpersonal. Many see it as a relation problem, not a problem of mental health. Let's analyze the major symptoms of BPD. You have stormy relationships, making it difficult to maintain close connections or keep a job. We frequently experience emotional outbursts, frequently with verbal abuse, physical attacks, or revenge. Even if they are acutely sensitive to abandonment and rejection, they criticize those closest to them. A friend, a mother, or a counselor may one day be idealized, but the next day is perceived as a terrible person because they don't live up to their expectations. These can act as self-destructives, e.g., reckless driving, compulsive smoking, shopping, eating, drinking, alcohol, drug, or sexual intercourse, as a means of preventing feelings of untenable isolation. Borders run the gamut from mild to severe. It is usually only those who have intimate knowledge of borders who know the extent of their emotional difficulties. Many sociologists believe that we live in a boundary society, heavy with righteous anger and light in understanding the viewpoints of others. Record talk shows during the day and you're going to understand what they mean. Or even better, listen to Congress's rhetoric and see it in action, or should I say, non-action. What should you do if you know your own borderline characteristics? Psychotherapy with a therapist who understands BPD can be very effective if you are motivated to to change. Life probably feels like an emotional roller coaster if you live with somebody with BPD. So what can you do? It is certainly a good idea to consider psychotherapy. Nevertheless, don't be surprised if he or she does not use counseling to gain wisdom, but to complain about others. And if your beloved's treatment doesn't go on, what can you do? Here are a few suggestions. Be consistent and predictable. Whatever you told your beloved one you were going to do or not do, keep your promise. If you receive a violent outbreak of charges, it won't be easy. But if you accept the outrage, the borderline behavior, and if you assume that your problems are now terrible, just wait. Encourage accountability. Don't become a rescuer for your wife. Don't be forced to take responsibility for his actions. Don't fit it if it smashes up the car. Don't bail her out if she piles up credit card debt. When you try to protect her from the consequences of her actions, she has no incentive to change. Do not reinforce your beloved's assumption that he was treated unfairly unless you really think it is true. Give honest feedback. BPD people tend to be confused about how their actions impact others. Offer honest feedback. Therefore, say, I know that when you're killed, it feels like rotten, but don't agree with this conclusion that it all is because of those horrible people that he worked for. Don't intensify the debate. Your beloved may misinterpret what you say. Offer constructive criticism, and you are confronted by a tirade about how gross you are. Offer a compliment, and you are accused of sponsorship. Explain your thoughts and through your emotions. Don't get stuck in a fruitless argument. Do your best to maintain your fitness and coolness, even though you are irritated, exhausted, and defeated by your beloved behavior. Chapter 28. Borderline Personality Disorder Test. Borderline personality disorder, known as BPD, is a type of mental illness that is considered serious. It is marked by emotional volatility, moods, interpersonal relationships, and self-image. Such uncertainty usually affects family and working life, a long-term vision, and a consciousness of one's individual identity. It is often difficult for people with BPD to control their emotions. Although this condition isn't as common as bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, it affects 2% of adults, especially young women. In these situations, the level of self-harm without the intention of suicide is high. In some cases, borderline personality disorder patients also tend to commit suicide. Those with BPD account for 20% of those treated with psychiatric problems. Most improve over time with help and eventually lead productive lives. Whereas people with bipolar disorders or depression appear to have a prolonged mood, BPD sufferers can experience severe episodes of cold, anxiety, and depression over a few hours and no more than a day. They can be related to a series of impulsive actions such as alcohol or drug dependence and self-injury. There is also a lack of self-esteem in patients with BPD. We can feel unfairly mistreated, hollow, or sometimes even bored. Such effects are most intense if people with a BPD believe they have no social support and are alone. The social relations for individuals with BPD are very dysfunctional. The attitude towards the friends, family, and loved ones changes from affection to respect to hate to extreme wrath. Other medical conditions, such as bipolar disorder, anxiety disorders, depression, substance abuse, and other illnesses are often associated with BPD. BPD is caused by the irregular activity of the brain control region of limbic. Neurotransmitters such as dopamine, acetylcholine, serotonin, and norepinephrine may be involved. The assessment used to diagnose borderline personality disorder is a borderline personality disorder study. The borderline personality disorder assessment is administered by a mental health professional. The assessment usually includes a range of questions or claims to be answered by the client. If the responses of the patient describe 5 or more signs, the treatment proceeds accordingly. Some of the issues included in the test were tested for reactions to abandonments, relationship issues, depression, questions about self-esteem and self-image, questions trying to learn more on individual or patient self-destructive behavior, questions about suicidal thinking and behavior, questions about feelings, particularly feelings of suicide. There are a number of websites with border personality disorder assessments that can help you determine if someone you care for has BPD symptoms. After the test is given, you can then discuss the results with a mental health professional to help diagnose and treat BPD. The causes, symptoms, and signs usually fall under the restricted personality disorder test. Treatment, together with the steps you can take to overcome the disorder, should only be advised by qualified doctors. Improvements have been made in BPD therapies in recent years. Person psychotherapy and group psychotherapy have brought most patients positive results. A new treatment, known as DBT, is typically a psychosocial intervention prescribed for BPD, which seems promising. Medications may be administered depending on the specific symptoms of the patient. Chapter 29. Dealing with clients with borderline personality disorder. To make a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, they include a persistent pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, of image and of affects and marked impulsivity, beginning by early adulthood, as demonstrated by 5 of the diagnostic criteria outlined later in the chapter. Marked impulsivity is, in itself, another type of instability. So, what the DSM-IV is emphasizing is a personality which is characterized by instability in all sorts of ways, and instability is certainly a key feature of the borderline personality disorder. There are different ways to perceive the borderline disorder. Very few people today would still go with the traditional psychoanalytic view, which is that the borderline personality is on the continuum between depression and neurosis. In other words, that this kind of personality exhibits many neurotic traits and, under stress, falls into psychosis. Of reality, many of those with a borderline personality disorder do not go insane under pressure, and this is why we often refer to them as being stably dysfunctional. They just remain predictably unstable of their self-image, in their mood, in their perception of others, and so on. The numerous, more modern understandings of borderline personality disorder emphasize different aspects of the problem. Many point to profound disruptions in the early mother-child relationship, such that it leaves the individual very impaired in terms of their relationships. I assume that this is an essential aspect. And what happens is that part of the person is trapped emotionally at the stage of being a baby, and in that part of themselves, they easily feel really empty because they did not get enough of the consistent love, closeness, comfort, and unconditional acceptance that is part of the normal experience of a good early mothering. Therefore, what happens later on is that they are left with this enormous neediness for this consistent closeness, love, and unconditional recognition and acceptance, and this becomes particularly obvious in their close relationships. If there is a need and the partner is there, the individual should try to meet the need of the partner. You will therefore want to be remembered, kept, or listened to, or cherished, or anything that fills the void. If the needs are not met, then tremendous anger will arise, and anyone with these problems will be able to tell you about this rage. It's like Kali's wrath. You know, the Hindu deity who's black and covers human heads with a garland? And when this rage comes out, in one way or another, you've taken away your head. For the person with the question, they usually experience it as absolutely real. The response could be, "What I wanted is acknowledgement. I don't think that was too much to ask," as the ashtray flies past your ear. It is often the case that the request is not so unreasonable. It is not unreasonable to ask for recognition from, for example, one's spouse. Rather, the response not to the application is so out of proportion for an adult. If the person was 6 weeks old and his needs were not met, he or she would feel extremely depressed breast and do 6-week-old babies, you weep like a fuck if you're not happy. Individuals with a borderline attitude often feel tremendous discomfort if their deep needs are not met, and because they represent a very young part of themselves, the emotions are always those of the archetypical world. Therefore, if you are their spouse and do not meet their needs, they may, and often do, feel betrayed by you, and out of that sense of betrayal comes anger. Now, the image that I have created is somewhat of an exaggeration in that not the only aspect of the child with a borderline condition is the child part of the adult. There are also children, adolescents, and adults. In many situations, adults are conscious of the unreasonability of the level of emotion and understand how important it is, and thus seek to hide it. It is only when the person is overcome by neediness or anger or a powerful childhood feeling that they cannot help but let those things go. When they become adult babies, in an emotional sense, and after that, they can hate themselves when they have time to think about it. Children's characteristics may be present to greater or lesser extent in people with borderline personality disorders. The stronger the degree to which the borderline pathology is present, the larger the boundary pathology, the more these people feel in the archetypical domain. If you are in love, this love may be immense and wondrous, but the disappointment will crumble if you are disappointed. So they live in a world of great opposites, and one of their main defenses splits psychoanalytically. So it's all either great or awful, and the ground is usually very small with a few shades of gray. Often this is also apparent in their thought. We tend to judge a friend either as great or as awful, not as having some good points or some bad ones, as we do in all reality. This dichotomous thinking, or black and white thinking, is named by cognitive psychologists. The dichotomy exists in all domains, and thus also refers to their sense of self. Whether they appear to be inflating, the work that I do is really exceptional, or they tend to fall into a deflation. I am a really useless crap. We see important people as really great, unique, or amazing, and if they are upset, the individual swings to a very negative position. Completely worthless, a complete joke, etc. You are therefore on a roller coaster ride in a relationship with someone with this disease. 1 minute you are worthless and blamed for all sorts of errors. You are defending yourself instead. And if the partner discovers through heated discussion that the blame still lies with him, then it collapses through feelings of shame. Note, as a counselor, you have the same relationships with things. Someone with a borderline personality disorder will only cling to at the start of the counseling situation if he or she has put you on a pedestal. An emotional possibility is not an appropriate counselor. You must be different. The law, of course, is that you have to fall off at some point if you've been put on a pedestal. Negotiating this absence is indeed a very necessary part of the treatment because it helps the patient to understand the truth of gray shades. But in the beginning of counseling, and here I think for the first year or two, you need to be different in how a mother should be special for a young baby. You must be there for them. You must love, you must be trustworthy, and you must listen very attentively to their perceptions and needs. This careful listening is one of the most important things. If in doubt, listen to them and focus on their experience. Of reality, this task is called mental mirroring and is one of the main tasks of mothers with children. The babies get to know they exist and who they are by focusing on themselves. Note, people with a borderline personality disorder need implicitly the limitingness of the early mother-child relationship, and so it becomes a condition where they feel like they are inside. Actually, they get into your mind. You will find yourself thinking a lot about them, and it is standard dictum amongst psychodynamic psychotherapists that a consumer is likely to have a borderline personality disorder if you dream about a client. Obviously, the needs of the controlling patient make it very difficult for both you and the client to restrict the therapeutic situation. You want to know that you really care, that they're not just another client, but someone special to you. So often, you want to meet outside of the treatment. It is also difficult for them to understand that out of this period there are counseling time limits and contact limitations. Nonetheless, these limitations are very necessary for both you and your customer.
Thank you so much for popping in and hanging out with me and listening to the Borderline Personality Disorder, the complete guide to BPD tools, techniques to control your emotions, anger, and depression. This is Nikki B signing off. Hit that like, subscribe, comment today. What books would you like to hear?